Hey guys, it's Sign here with HobbiesofaMan once again, and today we're going to be doing another wrap-up video for the month of May for 2024. And this one should be relatively quick because, as you guys can see, I didn't really read everything that I said I was going to read this month because I just had, like, I don't know, I was in a bit of a funk, actually, this month. And then I felt like I had a lot of stuff to do. And then I also ended up feeling very, like, agitated, very, overstimulated. And when I feel like that, reading is like the last thing I want to do, right? And it really sucks because I was really looking forward to reading a lot. I was like, this is like more or less the last time I'll have a lot of time to read, comparatively to like everything else, right? Maybe the 2 weeks between the summer semester and the fall semester might also be like comparable, but not to the same extent, I think. So I was pretty upset about that. But, I mean, a lot of real life, personal life type situations happened this month, right? So, I didn't really end up doing what I wanted to do, which sucks. But at the same time, like, the reasons why are all fully understandable, right? So, I mentioned last month that I was probably going to end up going to Mexico this month because my grandpa wasn't feeling great and there was some issues with his health that made it so that we have to go visit him, right? Make sure that we got to see him one last time. And well, we didn't really get to. So I finished school like May 2nd or 3rd or something, and I took a few days to get settled at my apartment, and then I came back home because it was my sister's graduation, right? She graduated from university, and it was time to go see her, right? Right before that, before I went back home, my grandma, my mom's mom, came in and she stayed with us most of the month. As soon as I got home, the day afterwards, my dad's brother, one of my dad's brothers, called him and he was like, dude, it's kind of serious, but maybe not. But I think that something is really wrong with dad. You might want to come, right? And it was the week, it was like 3 days before my sister's graduation, right? So my mom was like, well, we knew this was possible. You need to hurry up and go down to Mexico to make sure that you see your dad, right? And so we kind of all rushed to make this, moment happen as quickly as possible, right? So my dad ended up having to leave in the middle of the day. It was like noon or maybe 1 after, like right after we had lunch, when he, had to run off to the airport to take a plane down to Mexico, right? He got there, he got to see his dad, but my grandpa was, he wasn't kind of there. He was out of it. He was in a coma, right? I think it was medically induced, but I can't remember exactly. I think it might have not been. And so my dad spent the rest of the day with him after he made it there. And then at some point after midnight, I think a few minutes after midnight, my grandpa passed away. My dad managed to be there during his last moments. And so ultimately, my dad was in the right space at the right time to make sure that my grandpa passed away and that my dad got to experience closure, right? Which is much better than what happened when my grandma died, right? So although it was a pretty sad situation, I think ultimately it was probably for the best that my dad managed to go down to visit my grandpa, right? And I would have liked to see him to have seen him as well, but ultimately I think it was most important for my dad to do so, right? So it's okay that we didn't get to. I'll eventually go visit his grave at some point, but it's kind of weird because as an immigrant kid, your relationship with your extended family that, is like at least 8 hours away by car, if not more, that you maybe see once or twice every year for like a week or two is pretty stilted. And I don't really like saying stilted. I just don't have a better word for it because it's not like I dislike them. Stilted feels like there was a problem that didn't get fixed and so now your relationship is off. It's not really that. It's just like a lot of distance that maybe I wouldn't have had if I lived down there, right? And this distance became much more pronounced after my grandma died, right? When I was like 12, I think. And so I was struggling with like the sadness of my grandpa dying, right? And then the sadness of feeling sad for my dad, because my dad broke down and he started crying, and that makes me cry. Because we're not the type of people that really express emotions all that often, like that sort of emotion all that often. Especially my dad, he's a bit more traditional, right? And so it made me really sad. But then at the same time, I was also like upset or sad that I didn't feel as sad as I felt I should have felt, because I just wasn't that connected with my grandpa, right? Like the last time I talked to him was three years ago, but my like last time I saw him, but our conversation was pretty like, he wasn't there properly, like mentally. He was like in his early 80s, so he was already kind of gone. But also, just like there wasn't too much in common that I could really kind of express myself around him about and stuff like that. So I did have a conversation with him, the last one that I had with him, and it was a good one. But I feel like I wasn't just mourning my grandpa and being sad for my dad. I was also kind of mourning the idea of like a close family relationship, and there's just a lot. And then add to that was the fact that it was my mom's birthday was the day after my dad went to Mexico, right? So my grandpa died at the same time as my mom's birthday. So that like my dad is always gonna have this weird like bittersweet like feeling for the rest of his life around that day, right? And so I was trying to like make sure that my mom was happy during her birthday, while she was kind of struggling with like the fact of feeling sad for her husband, right? And then the day afterwards was my sister's graduation. So there's just like three massive, like important life events happening at the same time. And just really made me struggle for a bit, right? And then after that, it was just kind of like, my grandma is also in her 80s, and she has a lot more character than my grandpa did. So she's much easier to connect with, right? And I see her much more often than I saw my dad's side of the family. Not necessarily by design, just because my mom's family was much more willing to come visit us than my dad's family was, just because it was easier for them to do so, since there was so many, like there was a lot less of them, right? And so we do have a much closer relationship with my mom's family, with my mom's side of the family. But my grandma is very like religious and traditional and kind of old school, in a way that's really grating. And she's also really stubborn. And so talking with her was like this endless circle of like failed logic. And that's really difficult to kind of deal with every day for like a month, right? And so the vast majority of the time that I was here was spent feeling very overstimulated just by having this old lady that just screams a lot. Not necessarily anything bad, but like just it's like a really, it's just tiring to deal with family members like that, right? And then when she finally left on the 25th, my dad's brother, a different brother, because he has like 6, came up, and he was like, okay, he wanted to come visit us, and he's here now. He's away. They're at the mall or something. And so I really feel like I haven't really had time to decompress by myself. And so I'm looking forward to that in June. But all of this is a really long-winded way of saying I didn't read everything I meant to read. So sorry about that. I'm sure most of you guys that watch these probably don't care about my personal life, but it affects my hobby, right? So that's why it gets mentioned here. But that's basically everything I had to say about my personal life up to this point. I think that's update over. But it did affect my reading ability, right? So it kind of sucks, but it is what it is. Beyond that, I ended up watching a lot of baseball. So I would watch baseball instead of reading, which, is about equal on the scale of like people think it's boring compared to, my feelings on it. But baseball is just so easy to engage with because you pay attention for a bit of it, and then you can stop, and then you can come back, and then you can stop, and you can come back. And it's a really easy sport to keep track of. And so it's really enjoyable for me because I can engage and disengage with it quite easily with no real issues, right? I feel like if I'm watching a soccer game, I have to be a bit more engaged. If I watch something like a basketball game, I feel like I have to be locked in at all times. Otherwise, I'm going to miss something, right? So, that's why I like baseball. But, what was I saying? What was I getting to? Yeah, so I ended up just not watching a lot of TV, not reading too much, and I think that's it for life updates properly this time. Let's just get into the wrap up portion of the video, right? So in terms of my watch list, in terms of what I consumed in terms of television and movies this month, it's pretty small. I watched the last episode of Shogun, and I liked it. I think it was quite a good episode, but with some distance from the end of the show, I feel a bit disappointed at the kind of slow pace of the second half, because I felt like the show was building up really great, really awesome for the first half. And then the second half, although equally interesting, had this sort of like I don't know, this like defeated feeling about it, which is accurate because that's what the characters want you to feel, right? Like that's what the characters are wanting the other characters to feel. But at the same time, that isn't the feeling that I wanted to get out of watching that show, because the feeling I got from the first half of the season was like tension building, right? And then to kind of like go out like without really releasing that tension kind of doesn't feel great, right? But I need to properly sit down and rewatch the second half of the show and see if that's true or not, when I get to experience the whole thing in one go. So I'll have to do that before I finish reviewing the show, but those were kind of my feelings now that I've basically been away from Shogun for a month, right? So, yeah, then I watched the second Meg movie, the Megalodon movie, and it's so bad. The first one was, like, enjoyable enough. Like, it was, like, an understandable amount of schlock, but it was, like, good, right? It was, like, a good B movie. The Meg 2 is, like, the worst B movie I've ever seen, probably. Just because it just felt like a complete rehash of the first one with like barely any like changes. Like I feel like there was even scenes that were exactly the same. Like I don't think they reshot them. I think they just took them from the first movie and put them in the second one. And that's just really disappointing, right? So I don't enjoy that, but it is what it is. I also watched the first 3 or 4 episodes of My Hero Academia because it was on Netflix, and I just wanted to watch something, and I did want to watch the whole season, because I want to do this like rewatch / reread of My Hero Academia once it finishes, and I thought that this was the starting point to that. But I don't know, I kind of got distracted and I didn't come back to it, so I'll see when I get to watch it. But man, those early episodes are great. I really like the My Hero Academia anime. I think it's wonderful. At least that first season, the first half of the first season, I think. Beyond that, I can't remember if I like it all that much, but I really like those first couple episodes. I think they really encompass superhero media in a way that is really satisfying, right? So that's cool. Then I went down to the movie theater to watch The Phantom Menace, because they did a re-release for the 25th anniversary, and they also did like a special showing of a bit of The Acolyte, which is the new show that's coming out like in 2 weeks, like in less than a week, right? And the movie is not that great. Like, the plot line is not amazing, but man, it looks wonderful. Like, it looks so good. Like, even if it's dated at this point, right? Like, it clearly looks like it's from like early 2000s, or maybe like less. Yeah, early 2000s is probably fine, but it was from 1999, and it still looks great in the theater. Like, I thought that was phenomenal. I also had not seen this movie in like 10 years. Because The Phantom Menace is not the Star Wars movie that you rewatch, right? And I had forgotten so many little bits and pieces about it, right? And getting to experience it in the theater, which I'd never done before because I was born the same year that this movie came out, was awesome. I really, really liked it. I thought it was wonderful. I loved the pod racing scene, of course. I loved Duel of the Fates in the theater. I was literally the only person there. And it made it feel awesome. It was great. It was so amazing. Like I said, the plot is bad, but Honestly, the plot isn't bad. The plot is like serviceable, but not that interesting. But all of the little details and all of the things that they did and all of the weird stuff that happened in that movie and all of the visual effects and all of the backgrounds and all of the tech that's, on display there is awesome, phenomenal. I love it. I thought it was great. Hopefully I get to go see Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith if they re-release them this year, right? I think that'll be great. But at least I got to see the Phantom Menace, so that's cool. Then we watched Rebel Moon 2 or The Scargiver or whatever it's called. And although I really liked the first one and I was really excited about watching this one, I can't say that I was super happy with the result. Which is funny because I feel like I'm usually less critical than my parents. But my parents ended up really loving this movie for some reason. So I don't know. So I really don't know what happened there. But there were so many little details and things about this movie that really rankled me. Mostly because I felt like by the end of the first movie, we had established what was going to happen in this next movie. And that was show up, introduce these warrior characters to the village, tell them that we won. Turns out we didn't. And then have a big training montage like they do in a lot of Star Wars episodes that, ape off what they did in one of those old samurai movies. I can't remember which one. And then, have the villagers fight off against an invading army, right? And technically that is what happened, but in like the worst way possible. Like the villagers had 5 days to solve this issue of like, how are we going to train enough to fight against a properly trained army, right? And they spent 3 of those days gathering their wheat or whatever it is that they were farming. I think it was wheat, to use it as a bartering tool to kind of maintain a certain level of safety by hiding behind this collected wheat, right? Except that the guy that was in charge of the Imperial ship gave 0 fucks. And so he just started bombing the fuck out of the town, right? And so this goal, which was clearly exploited or meant to be exploited by the characters, that they told us this was important, and then they didn't tell us any way in which it wouldn't work, right? Because that's essentially what the whole goal of this movie has been. Save the wheat, make sure that the villagers don't die from hunger and also from war. And completely freaking forgot about it or made it so irrelevant that the first hour and a half or 2 hours and a half that we spent in the first movie became completely irrelevant, right? And then there was a romance plot between the main female character and the village guy that didn't really work for me that well. Although I guess it was set up properly. And then the cool Asian lady dies in the worst way possible. In like a really boring, stupid way. The Tarzan guy looks like he had never held an axe in his life before. And they did a bunch of slow action shots of him swinging the axe and doing it in the worst fucking possible way ever. And then, I don't know, there was just a lot of issues with this movie that just were not really enjoyable to me. Like, I couldn't overlook the issues, right? Like, in the first movie, I overlooked a lot of the issues because I thought the world building was good enough. I liked all of the character introductions. I think they did a good job with making everything look really cool and awesome. But that wasn't enough for the second movie. The second movie needed to deliver on all of the stuff that they set up. And I just don't think that it did. And that's really disappointing. So it sucks. I'm really upset about it. But it's whatever, I guess. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal. It's just, I was pretty disappointed afterwards. And I was pretty upset about it. Because it's like, I'd been looking forward to this movie. And I had been kind of relatively supportive of this franchise, right? Because I wanted to have something new and interesting that fit in that kind of like sci-fantasy genre. And this was a massive, insanely boring disappointment. And that sucks because it validates everything everyone else had said about this movie and completely invalidates what I thought about it initially, right? So that's pretty annoying. But yeah, that's all I watched. So in terms of what I read, so I read Savage Sword of Conan #2, And that was great. I really liked the story. I'm not necessarily a big fan of the artwork, but I think that the artwork fit very nicely within that story. So I like that. I think it worked out really well. I don't love the cover of that book, but it matches enough with the content that I am not upset about it. And I'm also looking forward to getting it signed because I live in Texas, right? And Robert E. Howard was also from Texas. He was from this little place called Cross Plains, Texas. And this year, and actually every year, in the early days of June, they hold this event, a 2-day event called Howard Days, right? And this year, Jim Sub, the current author of the Conan the Barbarian series and the apple of Titan Comics' eye, is going down to Howard Days. And he said on Twitter that he wasn't charging for signatures and he was willing to sign literally anything you brought him. So I'm going to bring him some books and I'm going to go see him and meet other great Conan fans from, I think, around the world probably. And I'm going to have a great time with that, right? So I'm very much looking forward to getting Savage Sword of Conan signed and maybe some other Conan books and probably even the Red Sonja book that I have from Jim Zub that I didn't really like all that much. But I like Jim Zub enough to to get his signature on that book. And it might make the book a bit more special for me. So yeah, that's the first thing I read this month. Then I read Steel of Celestial Shadows #2. This is the second volume in the series. I talk about it in my check-in video. And it was great. I really loved this book. I thought it was wonderful. I don't really want to say too much about it because I already mentioned it before. So check out the check-in video if you're interested. Then I read the 19 free comic book day comics that I got. The standout was, of course, the Conan the Barbarian book. And then the Flash Gordon book was also quite good. The Energon book was fine, but not necessarily my favorite. I felt like it was a bit superfluous. Like, it wasn't super necessary. But Ryan Otley drawing Transformers was pretty awesome. So I can't hate that. Then I read Legends and Lattes, and this was actually what helped me get through the early days of the month when I was really upset and emotionally all over the place. This book is really relaxing and calming, and it has a really nice vibe to it that I liked a lot. I had already enjoyed it, the first 70 pages of it when I was back in my apartment and wasn't feeling bad. But after my mom told me my grandpa died, after I had to make sure to uphold a certain level of happiness so that my mom didn't have a horrible day on her birthday, and before I had to go sit through 6 hours of my sister's graduation, I had basically like half a day of time to read this book. And it really helped me get through that really weird spot in my week that week. So I'm really grateful for it. I like the book a lot. I did a review for it. I think that the book is really wonderful and manages to make this really great feeling kind of vibe. But it definitely lacks a little bit in the world building and plot perspective, kind of, or like plot sense kind of vibe, in the sense that although the plot line of an orc lady that wants to get out of fighting and turn into a life of something meaningful and positive and that gives to other people through her coffee shop makes sense, the climax of the story is based around this guy that the main character knew from before, trying to ruin her life because he was slighted by her, right? The thing is that the slighting that made this guy go crazy and do this doesn't make sense. And so if you take the time to read into the book further than just the face value of what it's telling you, it kind of doesn't make sense too much. And that is a little bit disappointing because you would want this to be like airtight, basically, so that you can avoid having people like think about it, right? Like, I don't know if that makes sense. I guess the idea is it's not that important, so it's not going to matter. So it can be a bit nebulous, right? But I think it's actually the opposite. It should be airtight because with the vibes associated with this, if someone doesn't really catch on to those vibes exactly, or if the vibes are only good enough for like 90% of this reader's interest, that last 10% has to be the airtightness of the writing and the plotline and stuff. And I just feel like that wasn't there yet, or it wasn't there completely, right? At the same time, maybe I'm being overly nitpicky for some reason, and I just, it's not that serious. I don't know. I also maybe didn't make any sense. So let me know if you guys kind of understand what I'm saying. I just feel like there is a certain level of plot convenience that I accept, but this was a bit too much because the character didn't make too much sense to me, right? So that's basically the crux of the issue here. But otherwise, it's nearly perfect. I complained about it, but it's not enough of a complaint for me to not like this book, right? So that's basically all there is to it. But that was good. I really liked it. I recommend you guys read it as well. Then I read the first issue of the new Barbaric series. This is Barbaric Born in Blood. This is the new arc that's coming out right now. I have the digital edition that was given out through the Zoop, which is a crowdfunding kind of thing. I did not actually get a chance to read it before the physical came out, so I just read the physical, and I loved it. I thought it was great. But I don't really have too much else to say about it. Then I read Mighty Morphin Power Rangers vs. Godzilla. I read all 5 issues of the first series, and I loved it. I thought it was great. It was really fun. But I feel like the writers of that series really blew their load a bit too quickly. And I hate that phrase, but it makes too much sense not to use it. Because they immediately had Godzilla fight against Gigan and then Ghidorah immediately afterwards, right? And I feel like that's two of Godzilla's heaviest hitters in terms of like his enemies. And you didn't need to use both of them in the first series, right? The second series, the second arc of this story is happening now. It's being serialized now. And I have no clue who they're supposed to fight now that he has beaten Ghidorah and Gigan, right? So I guess he could fight Ghidorah again, but that feels less satisfying than if he had done it as the culmination of this like story, right? So I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts there. I could be wrong. I don't know. That's just how I felt about it. Then I did some naughty stuff, and I ended up reading some comic books that I don't own because they're at my comic book shop still. They're in my box, but I didn't really feel like waiting until I went back to Dallas and bought them to read them, so I ended up reading them online. And those comics are Ain't No Grave, number 1, Transformers, number 8, Blue Beetle, number 9, Thundercats, number 4, and Wonder Woman, number 9. So I will obviously buy those when I get back home to my apartment, but I just didn't feel like waiting for them, so I just found them online and decided to read them that way. I will read them again when I get them physically, and I will finally properly do the comic book by the issue videos for those books once I've read them physically, once I have the physical edition, right? So, yeah, but Ain't No Grave is awesome. It's a really interesting Western fantasy story, which is great. Blue Beetle 9 was good. Transformers 8 was great. I liked it a lot. Wonder Woman 9 was wonderful as well. Thundercats 4 was fine. I think that it was the end of the issue, of the end of the arc, which is fine. But at the same time, I feel like, was there all that much happening in this arc that needed to end yet? Like, I feel like 4 issues is too small of an arc. So, I don't know. I thought that was a bit weird, but it is what it is. Otherwise, that's it for those comics. Then I also ended up reading Heatseeker. This is the Gun Honey series. Heatseeker number 1, and number 2, and number 3, and number 4. And this is a reread for me. And I really like the series, but I was really upset about the inconsistency in the artwork. I think that is bad. I really am upset about that. I don't like that, because half of the like really great stuff that comes out of Gun Honey is the artwork, right? Like the story is great and really interesting and fun, and it's badass to have this like female like Black Widow, James Bond-esque type character that is really badass and awesome. And then Heatseeker is supposed to introduce you to another one that's just like that, another female character that's just like that. And what happens is that you do get that character, but then you get a horrible, like, inconsistent level to her representation. And that really tanks the enjoyment, right? Like, half of the battle for comics is the artwork. And if the artwork doesn't really match the vibe of the story, or if it's inconsistent, or if it's, like, really weird that it's just all over the place, it really damages my enjoyment of it, right? And so it really sucks. I was kind of upset about that, but the story was really, really good. I really liked the story. It's so convoluted and ridiculous, but also so fun. So, yeah. Then I read Dino Sanctuary number 4, and this was great. I really liked this volume. My favorite chapter here was the one where they hunt down a velociraptor. Basically, a velociraptor ended up loose in this little village, and they had to go find it. And it ends up being in a like a little Shinto priest shrine thing place, a little temple. And the whole thing was just great. I really, really liked it. I thought it was a phenomenal bit of storytelling there. So I loved Dino Sanctuary. Is a great series, but that chapter specifically was wonderful. I liked it a lot. Then I read Valerian, the Complete Collection, Volume 1, and actually I only read 2/3 of it. So I read the first 2 stories, which are Bad Dreams, which introduces us to Laureline and to Valerian. And then I read the second story, which is the City of Shifting Waters, which is basically, it's a story that tells you about the origins of where Valerian and Laureline work, right? How the modern, or like how the main setting of this story became a place, right? And I thought it was good. But I have not read like the seminal story yet, which is The Empire of a Thousand Planets, right? Which is what the movie is based on. And so I want to read that today, as of recording this video. But hopefully, if I don't get to read it today, I'll get to read it tomorrow, the day that the video releases. And I'll say that I read Valerian during my sci-fi month, right? Although at this point, I think I need to have a second sci-fi month because I just have way too many sci-fi books, right? So, yeah, that was really great, actually. I really liked Valerian. I think that the concept of it is really great. I don't necessarily think that some of the execution is my favorite. Like, the artwork sometimes is a bit odd. But also, it's like from 1970. So, I really can't compare it to modern comic book art because there's 55 years of difference, right? Like, that style is going to be outdated regardless of what I feel about it or regardless of what I want to complain about, right? So there really is no point in complaining. However, I will mention that the worst part about it is definitely the inconsistency when it comes to coloring in the character's eyes. So I don't know why these artists do this thing where they kind of wash the human characters' faces in like a single color, right? A brown skin tone color. But sometimes they go in and fix the eyeballs so that the eyes are white. And then sometimes they just leave them all brown. And so it's really annoying because like it could be from panel to panel or from page to page. And it's just kind of like, dude, why are you doing this? Pick a version and just stick to that, right? At the same time, I feel like it's supposed to be an artistic choice to show that these characters are in shadow or something, that you can't really tell what color their eyes are, or you can't tell that the white of their eye is white. But it's annoying because I don't think that it really applies to the whole thing. It only happens on their faces. So it's kind of annoying, right? Like that was the only complaint I really had. The storytelling is also not necessarily super amazing. It has a certain level of weakness to it. But I can't really attribute the weakness to the plotline elements. It could be just translation. It could be the age. It could be like all sorts of things, right? And the plot itself isn't necessarily weak. I just feel like there's like bits and pieces missing sometimes, right? So even though I really like what is happening, I feel like I would like it if there was more to it, right? And I think that I'll just feel like that constantly when I read, European comics. So I don't really have a problem with it per se. It's just like things I notice, right? And because this is an opinion-based channel, I feel like it's fair to say those opinions, right? Then I started reading The Ghost in the Shell. And although I really like the artwork, what I've read about it so far, the first 70 or something pages, have not really made me love this series yet. Like, I think the artwork is really cool, right? But so far, it feels like it's just like a Monster of the Week type show kind of feeling to it, like where each couple pages, the story resets, and it's just like the, Kusanagi being told by this ape-looking guy to do something, and then she does it, and then they fuck up, and so they have something else that happens that they have to go do, and it just feels like it's repeated like 5 times in like 70 pages. And although that's not necessarily a problem, because I think it will change eventually, it hasn't been all that exciting. And then I also noticed that there's a lot of notes included in this. Like a lot of little side tangents and like little things and like little like additions and stuff like that are supposed to explain what's going on. But like as a reader, like I don't like that. It's distracting, right? Like it's annoying that I see a page and then along all of the margins, there's a bunch of writing everywhere. And this writing is what's telling me what's happening instead of what I'm actually seeing on the page, right? That's a bit annoying. As a collector or someone that respects the art behind making these things, I appreciate all of those notes, right? I think that all of that stuff is good because it gives you more information, more stuff to understand, more things to connect with, right? But while I'm reading, it's really annoying. And I don't know what to do about it. Like, I don't know if I should just ignore all of that stuff and just read the story without the notes and then go back and read the notes later. Or if I should just, like, read them as it goes or what. And I don't know if this is going to be a problem throughout the whole thing or just early on when the mangaka decided, you know what, I didn't really explain this stuff well enough. Let me go back and add in some notes so people understand, right? And if that was the case, if that was necessary, why not write your story again? Write, more pages, add more things, right? Like, I don't know. I feel like this is just like a problem with older manga. And because I felt like this with Spring End a bit as well, where it was like, okay, this is good and I enjoy it and I think the artwork is interesting, but you're just not explaining enough stuff. And I also felt like that with Captain Harlock and with like some Go Nagai stuff, right? So I think that's just a concept that happens with older manga that I just have to get used to, right? So it is what it is. Overall, I'm not super convinced by Ghost in the Shell yet, but I like the aesthetic a lot. So those are my thoughts with that. And then finally, the last thing that I've been kind of reading here has been Adam the Beginning. And I read volumes 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. And if I get lucky, I'll start 8 now tonight, right? So I should get halfway through the series tonight, but I don't know if that'll be the case. So far, I read through a bunch of stuff that I had already read before, which is the first 6 volumes. And I have enjoyed every second of it. I think it's wonderful. Adam the Beginning is a great story. It has a lot of iRobot vibes. It has a lot of Wall-E vibes. It has a lot of like Chappie or what's that other series? I can't remember. It basically just has a lot of vibes of like other robot media in a way that is really satisfying and really nice. And it also has a lot of self-care. Like it really tries to make sure that you understand these characters and to understand their feelings and why they feel like that. And a lot of it is really great because it makes me feel very attached to these characters, very endeared by them, right? And Adam, the main character, A106, the robot, is a really fun character, right? So the first 4 arcs or the first 4 volumes have the first 5 arcs of the story, which are basically like just introducing you to Adam, and then introducing you to the world, and then setting up that there's more to the world coming, right? And that's where episodes or issues or volumes, and that's where volumes 5 and 6 kind of start the new part of the storyline by introducing A107 Uran, the World Robot Battling Competition, and then moving on from, you know, these kids in a lab making a robot to these kids in a lab and making a robot that has to go fight in the world, you know, and to exist as a thing, as a person, right? And that's really interesting and enjoyable, right? And that kind of continues on in volume 7 here. And I'm curious to see where it goes on from there, right? Because it's not that simple. Like, there's more things going on, and I just can't wait to figure them out, right? So, yeah, Out of the Beginning is great. I really recommend you guys check it out. It's available in English through Titan Comics. You can get the first 7 volumes of it. So, recommend you guys check it out and enjoy it if you are interested in stuff like this, right? So, yeah, and then finally, the last thing that I started reading that I didn't really get to, you know, get too deep into is Ultra Mega, which actually recently was announced is going to come back. They're going to do another series for Ultra Mega, which is great because this had been sitting in limbo as a 4-issue story for like ever, right? I think it's been going on, or it's been set up to be a story that was going on since 2020. And so it's been a long time coming for fans of the series. And I think that I will quickly become a fan of the series because I really liked what was going on at first. I thought it was really crazy and weird and enjoyable, and I was really looking forward to reading more of it. I just got distracted, right? So, yeah, I will finish reading as much as I can before the end of the month. If I can't, I will actually probably end up adding it on to June, which means that I'll probably end up having less time for June on the Range, or maybe I'll prioritize June on the Range. I'm not really sure, but hopefully I'll get to read more of this stuff next month and finish reading all of the stuff that I didn't want to read for June on the Range next month. I just don't know how it's going to shape up, right? So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys read this month, and thank you guys so much for watching. See you guys later.